It seems as though you can largely distinguish Romance languages according to how they dealt with the tricky consonant clusters inherited from Latin. We've been speaking about this a lot recently, comparing Spanish and Italian, and in this video, I want to continue that comparison, but particularly looking at how Spanish and Italian each adopted different strategies to deal with the consonant clusters ending in the lateral alveolar proximant, that is, ul to you and to me. If you are familiar with one or both of these languages, you'll notice a pretty consistent pattern. So words that begin with consonant clusters ending in ul in Spanish usually end in I in Italian. A good example of this is plano. Plano in Spanish is piano in Italian. Planta, but pianta. Flor, fiore. You have the famous Plaza de España in Sevilla, but in Italy you might have the Piazza Navona. What's going on here? Well, phonetically, Spanish speakers seem to have been historically more comfortable with conserving the lateral alveolar proximant. Italian, or rather medieval Tuscan, seems to have taken the approach that it did with many phenomena, specifically with pronouncing unstressed vowels between consonants, for example, and taken the approach of palatalization, of lifting. If you pronounce planta and then afterwards say pianta, you can notice that that E is pronounced a little bit further back, higher in the mouth. It's an example of palatalization. It's also an example, of course, of a consonant becoming a vowel. Now, and this makes me wonder, given that we actually see it in quite a lot of instances where phonemes in Italian differ considerably from their Latin predecessor, is it fair to say that there is a general tendency towards palatalization in phonemes that are considered difficult to pronounce in medieval Tuscan? This seems certainly to follow the pattern that we've looked at so far in this. But I can't really leave you there alone, because beyond positing this interesting hypothesis, I think there's something else I'd like to talk about, because there are examples where Spanish doesn't conserve, and those are actually pretty interesting. They give us some of the more iconic sounds and, for want of a better term, orthographic symbols in Spanish. I said earlier that planum in Latin becomes plano in Spanish, and yes it does, but only in some circumstances. The more common rendering, the more commonplace rendering has always been llano. Look at this word, claves, keys, in Latin. In Italian, chiave follows the palatalization process we've looked at already. But in Spanish, well, you'll know that it's llave. How did this come about? Well, I think initially, to understand that, we've got to look at the fact that though we would, in general in Spanish, pronounce that as llave, some Spanish speakers still, and certainly much more so in the early modern and late medieval past, would have pronounced it as llave. A little bit like the sound represented by GL in Italian, like meglio. So Spanish first went from something like planum to llanum, and then to the modern llano. That is a sound change that I'm extremely interested in, because we see across Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian different strategies adopted for this particular sound. I want to make a video about that in the future, so stick around for that. As soon as I've got the research done, it will be published here on the channel. But for now, I want to thank you, and I want to ask you, have you ever noticed this before? The fact that Spanish and Italian have got these different strategies for approaching this? Is perhaps this Italian approach what renders Italian such a musical language? I'm interested to hear what you think in the comments below. But until then, I will say thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Grazie mille. E ci vediamo dopo. Ciao.